New Zealand could have enough COVID-19 vaccine for 750,000 people by early next year. So who will get it first, and what about everybody else? American drug company Pfizer has announced its coronavirus vaccine appears to be more than 90% effective. New Zealand already has a deal with the company to buy 1.5 million doses, enough for 750,000 people, subject to it passing clinical trials and MedSafe's approval. Our medicines watchdog has started reviewing early clinical trial results to help speed up that process, but the government says the vaccine will still have to go through all the usual safety checks before MedSafe makes its final recommendation. Minister for Research, Science and Innovation, Megan Woods, explains who'll get it first.
There's three key groups that will have the immediate access, and they're broadly those at risk of spreading COVID, those at risk of contracting COVID, and those with increased morbidity and mortality associated with COVID. I think one of the really important things, and we've always talked about when we talk about the vaccine strategy, is we've never put all our vaccine eggs in one basket, that our approach has been very strategic, and I think what we're seeing today is actually that approach is paying dividends. We've got very early access to this vaccine, that we've got a number of ways of accessing vaccine. We hope to have another of these advanced purchase agreements announced before the end of this year. And we're also, of course, talking to Pfizer about any possibilities of upping our order.
One of the categories you say will get priority is those at risk of contracting COVID-19. Isn't everyone at risk of contracting COVID-19?
Well, look, we know that there are some cohorts of people that have increased susceptibility. We know people with immune response disorders. We know that there's certain conditions such as diabetes, asthmatics, people that do have increased risk. And I think that's been well understood as we've gone through this pandemic, that there are some people that not only are more susceptible to catching it, but if they do contract it, can be experienced in a much more severe way.
So will MIQ workers get it first, nurses and doctors?
So those at risk of spreading, I think that anyone who is working at the front line, I think is a group of people that will be considered. Of course, beside each of these advanced purchase agreements, which is part of the vaccine strategy, of course, very detailed immunisation plans are being put in place for each of the vaccines. So that's the kind of detail that the immunisation plan will go into.
So increased mortality and morbidity are reasons to get to the front of the queue. Maori have very poor outcomes. Will you be prioritising Maori for the vaccine?
Look, I think that we do know that a lot of the comorbidities for COVID sit very heavily within our Māori and Pasifika communities. So I think that the inclusion of that category will mean that there will be a prioritisation of anyone that has those increased those morbidities and mortalities with it. Often they're associated with a number of other non-communicable diseases which have a high prevalence in those.
So you will be giving priority. You will be giving priority to Māori, Minister?
No, what I'm saying is I think that Māori will probably feature quite heavily in that category by the fact that there is a number of comorbidities that lead to higher mortality figures. So anyone who falls within those categories, but certainly considering our Māori and Pasifika populations, has been an important part of the science and technical group that we've put together.
What about ministers and the Prime Minister? Are you going to be at the front of the queue?
Well, there certainly hasn't been any discussion about that, Lisa.
It's a serious question. As so-called essential workers, will you be prioritised?
I have not been involved in any discussions about that.
So who is going to make the final decisions over who gets this vaccine?
The Ministry of Health, as they do with any vaccination plan, they'll put together a vaccination plan, and as I say, that different vaccines will work differently with different cohorts of people. Some will be more, will be a better match for some populations than others, and that's the very detailed work that health professionals, led by the Ministry of Health, will put together.
Can you be more specific, Minister? What do you mean? A committee of who? Who are these people who are going to make what is a really important decision for the entire country? Who are these faceless people?
So the Ministry of Health put together immunisation plans. I can't give you names. I don't have that detail with me. But as we do with any immunisation rollout, that there are people who are expert in this field who understand these things very well. They'll be making the decisions.
Minister, would you undertake to get us those names?
No.
Why not?
I'm failing to understand why you need the names of the people that will be making the decisions around the immunisation strategy. If it's,
It
I can ask them
affects 5
questions.
million people, and it's an essential decision that people would probably expect some transparency around. So it's not unreasonable, is it, to know who are making these decisions?
I think that we've always been incredibly transparent about, Lisa, is what the criteria will be. And I think that that is the really important thing, that people and New Zealanders understand for each of these vaccines that we access, that people understand what the decision-making criteria will be, how it is that we are doing that allocation. I fail to see how me giving you the name of some health professionals who could get lobbied very heavily will add to the conversation. But what I can give you an absolute undertaking is transparency around the rollout, around the criteria, and all those things that New Zealanders have an absolute right to know about.
So that criteria, the 3 criteria that you listed, are incredibly broad. Is there more detail somewhere?
Oh, absolutely. There'll be more detail that comes through as we progress through the immunisation plan, and we will be releasing that in due course.